So welcome, Alicia. We greatly appreciate your leadership. As always at Setsi, we want to begin things by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we're on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation sovereignty. So, Alicia, welcome again. I'd love to hear about the work that you're doing in the climate action ecosystem.
Absolutely, and it's such a pleasure to be here. So in a nutshell, I would say my work is focused on climate justice advocacy is kind of the way I lean into it. And from my own educational background in economics and ecological economics specifically, I really got attuned into the UN Sustainable Development Goals framework as it recognizes the intersections of these things, right? We can't just be talking about climate change in a silo, we can't just be talking about gender equality and other social issues in silos. They're actually really interconnected and they play off of each other. And so a lot of my work is with social enterprises and community organizations and just trying to translate this SDG framework, because the UN put this thing out in 2015 with these very national and international level indicators and targets that are really hard to sink your teeth into when you're working at the local level. But I really believe that it's at the local level with the community level and grassroots organizations that we are actually achieving sustainable development or advancing it at least. And so it's really important to be able to tap into what's happening locally, to translate into that international language or even nationally to understand what's happening. So yeah, in a nutshell, just really advocating for that kind of interconnected acknowledgement of climate work, how much it relies on all of the work that our communities are working on, and just advocating for that voice and finding creative ways to connect into that ecosystem.
That's fantastic. So in your view, how would you like to see disruption within the climate action ecosystem?
I mean, big, like blue sky vision, like let's stop digging for fossil fuels already. Like, why can't we just let go of that? And obviously we have energy needs to be met and we need to reinvest in renewable energy and other infrastructure capacities. But yeah, I wish my biggest wish is that we move into really deep transformative change. I think the experience of the pandemic over the last 3 years should be inspiration and not just exhaustion of, oh my gosh, it's over, let's get back to business as usual. Because the truth is that business as usual wasn't really serving all of us. The vision of climate action and climate justice isn't just about sacrifice or giving up our modern conveniences. It's about actually making the world better because it never really served us in the first place. And so we can merge these issues of serving folks who look like us, serving our communities in a way that secures that sustainable future. Because sustainability really is about like what can be sustained, and the way that we're operating now just simply isn't. The earth is literally shaking us off and saying, listen, we can't do this anymore.
Right. So as you speak, I can feel like your passion like coming through, and I'm wondering, can you articulate your personal mission and vision in this important work?
Oh, I mean, I would say that my personal mission is really in supporting the laying the tracks, laying the groundworks, the architecture, if you will, of helping people to imagine what that better future could look like. What does it mean for us to be ecologically sustainable, still prosperous, still equitable and just? How do we merge these things together? What does this other world of our imaginings actually look like, and how can we actually build the building blocks and shift what we're doing now to make that a reality? And my vision is that we get there within my lifetime, that we avoid climate collapse. I really hate all of the dystopian media we have around climate change, and hope that we can start to imagine, we don't need to just kind of despair and say, what, it's all going to go to shit. Let's just take care of what we can take care of while we can survive. Because the truth is, we're not actually all going to be wiped off the planet. Humanity will still be on Earth, it's just going to be looking really different. And so
Right.
how can we imagine ways of that looking different in a good way and not just in these very dystopian, tribal warfare kind of images we see in the TV and movies these days.
Right. So how important is social innovation and impact measurement in these movements?
Yeah, so social innovation is really key because it's one of those tools or one of those sets of tools. It's a toolbox we have to help make that a reality. It's a way to kind of get into the sandbox and play around and test things before we actually, unpack them. In my work, coming from the Caribbean, we like to talk about the small island developing states as a lab, as a test of social innovation. If we can make certain things happen here, then we can make it happen everywhere. And I think that's one of the big, drivers and benefits of that framework. Impact measurement, on the other side, is really important because, like I was saying before around the SDGs, like, how do we know that we're making the progress we want to make if we're not actually measuring tangibly, what is it that we want to achieve? What is the data that we're collecting around that? And how can we aggregate and attest and have this evidence base against the impact that we're making as organizations and as communities.
Right. Thank you. So what inspires you most about your work?
I would say the thing that inspires me most is seeing the little wins. Every week we are bombarded with terrifying news stories, but there are also little wins here and there. In Toronto, the other day was the Hot Docs documentary film festival, and I went with a friend and we saw one of the documentaries about deforestation in the Amazon in Brazil and the challenge that these different indigenous nations were getting into and like protecting their lands against loggers and these capitalist interests. And just last week, the new president, the reinstated President Lula, just protected these huge swaths of land again under indigenous leadership, just recognized a whole, ministry of indigenous leadership with indigenous leaders across the country at local, state or provincial levels and at the federal level. So it's seeing those little glimpses into what's possible that keeps me going. Like, let's just keep getting more of those.
Yes, absolutely. Celebrating the wins. And what challenges and barriers do you face in the work, and how are you working to overcome those?
I think one of the biggest challenges that, society in general is facing is just really understanding or being able to see through the complexity involved in this work, right? It's just, we have, our issue that we care about or that we are most impacted by in our day-to-day lives. And sometimes it's hard to see past that. And so what I'm really focused on, trying to achieve is helping folks see the connections, maybe it's air pollution in your neighborhood. Maybe it's, lack of jobs in your area. Maybe it's all of these things, but they're actually deeply interconnected. And how can we identify those interconnections and help people unpack that? Another challenge is the resource constraints, obviously, especially when we're looking at, community organizations that are serving very, deep-seated challenges for their communities already, dealing with resource constraints, whether that's from, the granting ecosystem or different funding models that they're dealing with, or just the human resource capacity of just like, listen, we're trying to keep folks alive, take care of people's needs. We don't have time to dig into all of these things. And so really trying to connect to, again, the way that this sustainable development framework and this climate action framework still connects to that work and is still kind of all of our responsibility, but not in a way that feels overwhelming. So it's always a fine balance to find. Like, some organizations, it's just like, you know what, you're right, you're stretched, let's not overdo it. But I'm always really interested in seeing what's the little opportunity that we can tap into. Yes. To really, drive those other pieces forward and encourage others in our networks to act as well.
Right. Is systemic discrimination or anti-Black racism an issue or challenge for the work or for you in your work?
I mean, systemically, absolutely, it's a challenge, like it's not a coincidence that it's mostly, racialized neighborhoods that, have fewer access or lower access to transit, literally have fewer trees in the neighborhood, are closer to industrial zones, and they're therefore facing greater challenges of pollution, have, lower investment from the government into different educational and employment resources. All of those things are connected. There's environment there, there's employment, there's economic opportunity, and there's inequality involved there. We're definitely seeing some slow pushes to progress with the bill on environmental racism in Canada, but it still hasn't been fully, adopted and passed yet. And so that's definitely a challenge. I think for me as an individual, it comes in the opposite direction where sometimes it's a bit tokenizing, you're engaged or you're hired because, oh yes, we need to fill a quota. We need this young Black woman with a foreign accent to come speak or do something. And like, yeah, we'll take the opportunity, but to what extent can we really be heard in this space? And are we not just being used for promotional purposes and marketing to say that, we did this thing and we included these voices? How are we actually opening up spaces to be changed by these voices?
Right.
So that's definitely a challenge. But I think, really connecting with the youth climate movement, as I am, a bit of an elder youth these days, but I'd like to think still youthful. It's really great to connect with folks in that space, in that way. And that's where typically I find it's mostly young people of color leading this work. And it's really great to have that community to support the work. Yeah.
Absolutely. So in terms of greenwashing and establishing models of accountability, how do you feel activists and leaders can press organizations and institutions?
Yeah, I mean, greenwashing is a really big problem. The work of sustainability needs to be more about just checking some checkbox here and there to say, like, yeah, we stopped printing so much and we went to digital, and now all of a sudden we're doing this thing. I think what activists have really been able to do is call people to account and ask for the evidence and dive into the numbers to see, what is it that you're really doing. I'm really inspired by Banking for Better Future. That's really calling the big 5 banks to task. Like, you say you're investing in all of this sustainable infrastructure and renewable energy, but why is your bottom line still so tied up with the fossil fuel industry? Why are you still so tied up with challenging Indigenous land defenders? Why are you still so tied up in all of these other things? So I think, the work of activism and sustainable leadership in general can really tap into the details that I think the general public, rightfully so, doesn't really have time to do for themselves, and to help folks, see through the, what's the word I'm looking for? See through the haze and the bright lights of the greenwashing campaigns.
Right. Absolutely. So before we close, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action?
Yeah, I mean, I always say that sustainability is about way more than just emissions reductions. And climate justice is about making sure that not just, the textbook definition will tell you that climate justice is about making sure that all communities are heard when we're looking at sustainable solutions. But for me, it's really about starting from cause and not just treating symptoms of the system, right? The fact is that we are facing climate catastrophe because of colonialism. It's a direct result of the practice of human trafficking across the Atlantic slave trade. It's a direct result of the land grab of Indigenous territories. It's a direct result of all of these racial hierarchies in politics and the separation from nature that, the dominant Western culture has ingrained in us. And so what's really important is not just doing sustainable things now, because the fact is that we have all of the tech, we have all of the knowledge, we have all of the solutions here. And the only reason that we haven't been able to make the transformative shifts necessary is because we're still stuck in these systems that brought us here in the first place. And so reparations is essential for climate action. Reconciliation is essential for climate action. And so is starting to rethink our modes of being and doing and reorienting ourselves with just understanding that we are part of nature. And like, that's really the crux of it. And if we could understand that we as part of nature are impacted by our ecosystems, are connected to the trees outside and the network of fungi that connect those trees, then we could really start to reimagine and do things differently. Hopefully that wasn't too quickly, because yes, when I get excited, I talk really quickly.
I can feel your positive energy for this through the way that you speak, and I think it's so beautiful. So we appreciate your time and your remarkable leadership, Alicia. So we'll close the same way that we began this interview, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we're on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much.
Thank you.